5 of the worst wartime betrayals. During war, who you can trust is one of the most essential and important things, whether it's on the battlefield or in the war room. Betrayal of this trust can have catastrophic consequences that ripple far beyond personal grievances, impacting the entire trajectory of war and human history. Across thousands of years, there have been times in war when people have made decisions that can only be seen as a deep betrayal of their comrades and country. The attack on Mers-el-Kébir. It all started soon after Dunkirk. It's 1940, and the French army has suffered heavy losses. By June 7th, the Germans were less than 70 miles from Paris. The chances of the French negotiating with the Axis began to look more and more likely. The rest of the Allies, particularly the British, had a big problem with this. The French fleet was one of the world's largest navies and a strength against the Axis powers. What would happen if it fell straight into the Germans' waiting hands? Not only would the loss of such a fleet be a major blow, but handing it to the other side could spell disaster. In Britain, talks on how to proceed if France dropped out of the war had already begun. Admiral Darlan of the French fleet tried to assuage these concerns, responding he would never hand over the fleet, and orders to scuttle it would be given if there was no choice. In Britain, the War Cabinet met and agreed that they would only allow France to sign an armistice if it was moved to British ports before negotiations began. Unfortunately, this would leave French North Africa wide open to retaliation, and Premier Reynaud wasn't willing to risk it. The two countries continued to go back and forth. Reynaud resigned after another British proposal was rejected by his cabinet, and French Admiral Darlan was adamant Britain wouldn't survive the German advance and that he didn't, quote, create a fleet to offer it to the British. Nevertheless, word was sent to the British reiterating their promise to never let the fleet fall into German hands. Unfortunately, Churchill was disinclined to take them at their word, so Britain discussed another option. They sink the French fleet themselves. Meanwhile, Hitler recognized the French would never include the fleet in any armistice and instead offered that the ships would remain at Axis-controlled ports, firmly out of the war effort. The armistice was signed on June 22, 1940. It was then that Britain began discussing the reality of Operation Catapult. Appointing Vice Admiral Sir James Somerville, he was to sail to Mers-el-Kébir, where a portion of the French fleet was kept, with 4 options for the admiral. 1. Bring ships back to British harbors and continue the fight. 2. Bring ships back to British harbors and allow them to be repatriated. 3. Sail to French ports in the West Indies and have the ships demilitarized. 4. Sink them. The admiral refused. With great regret and no small degree of awareness regarding the treachery they were displaying, British Vice Admiral Somerville gave the order to open fire on the French at 5:54 p.m., July 3rd. It became the first instance of the two countries firing on each other since the Battle of Waterloo. At the same time, 200-plus French warships and naval auxiliaries were seized in British home ports. 15 minutes later, Somerville gave the order to halt. He told the French he needed to see the ships sinking or he'd have no choice but to reopen fire. However, during this, a battleship managed to slip away, a tactical blunder by Somerville that led to follow-up attacks over the next 3 days. The result of this betrayal by the British was immediate. The French severed relations and responded by symbolically bombing Gibraltar. The British papers lauded the whole move as horrible but necessary, and Churchill gave a rousing but not entirely true speech to the House of Commons, claiming the Brits had succeeded in taking most of the French fleet and that a battlecruiser had aimed to put itself under German control. By July 6th, 1,297 French officers were missing or dead, and a further 351 were wounded. Somerville's letters to his wife showed his horror at leading the attack, calling it the biggest political blunder of modern times, and seething he had been chosen to do such a lousy job.